Welcome, everyone. Hi, my name is Angelique Nixon, and I am a lecturer at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, St. Augustine Unit. And I'm just very, very pleased to introduce our heads of department from both the Nita Barrow Unit and the St. Augustine Unit. We have launched, we've embarked on this joint launch of Krystal Ghisyawan's book. And so we want to welcome everyone, and we wanted to start with some music to get us in the mood. And as we go into this work of erotic cartographies, you will understand why. And so it is my pleasure to introduce first Dr. Halimah DeShong, Head of Department of the Nita Barrow Unit, Institute of Gender and Development Studies, as well as Dr. Suann Barratt, Head of Department of the Institute of Gender and Development Studies, St. Augustine Unit. So I'll ask if Dr. DeShong can first bring us welcome, and then we'll go to Dr. Barratt.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Nixon, and thank you so much, Dr. Attai, for the beautiful way in which you ushered us into this celebration. We were discussing earlier that it's Fantastic Friday, Trinidad and Tobago, bring back the carnival. And I think it's a really fantastic Friday for us to be gathered here. It is a pleasure to be here celebrating and shining a light on Dr. Krystal Ghisyawan on the publication of her 2022 book, Erotic Cartographies, Decolonization and the Queer Imagination, published by Rutgers University Press. Earlier this week, our students taking feminist epistemologies and methodologies read Dr. Ghisyawan's essay on subjective mapping as a methodology for studying the experiences of same-sex desiring, same-sex loving women as they negotiated space, safety, and sexuality in their daily lives. Trust me when I say, it's a great pleasure to be here in recognition of this critical work that traces in their own words and through their own visual depiction, same-sex loving women rendering of self, society, and positionality. We read the essay and marked the significance of that abbreviated version of your thinking, Dr. Ghisyawan. But there's something about a book, something about picking up a book, that extended treatment of a subject or issue that is not to be taken for granted. The discipline, focus, dedication, follow through, rigor, the author's imprint, and in your case, Krystal, the space to carefully and thoughtfully complicate what we think we know about sexual and gender identity, relations of power and coloniality, reminds us why books are always to be valued and celebrated. Dr. Ghisyawan's work finds a home in the recent increase in scholarship on Caribbean sexuality studies, particularly studies which focus on non-binary sexual and gender identity and sexual citizenship. It finds a home in the study of critical feminist methodologies and epistemologies. It finds a home in sociological and cultural studies. It is a work that transcends the tidery boundaries of disciplines and fields, while at the same time possessing the discipline and elegance and ease of beautiful prose. There's a love and care with which you write, Krystal, and that is endearing. And I can't wait to read your extensive treatment of the critical, ontological, epistemological, and methodological questions you pose in the text with students and with a wider community of doers and thinkers. In a 2009 essay, Kamala Kempedu closed her analysis of Caribbean sexuality studies with the following, and I quote, "For sexuality to be a vantage point for Caribbean research and study, the current complexities need to be acknowledged and the intricacies of a range of sexual arrangements and practices appreciated. It is perhaps through untangling the knot of power and violence, pleasure and desire, and intersections of gender, race, and economies in the context of 21st century Caribbean global development that the map can be filled in or redrawn. Caribbean sexuality might then find the space and respect it deserves," end of quote. To see the charge issued by Kempedu, who at the time invoked the mapping metaphor, incidentally, taken up as you have so carefully done, Krystal, in concert with your interlocutors like Caribbean sexuality studies like Kamala Kempadu, Angelique Nixon, Rosamond King, Nikoli, Attai, Tracy Robinson, Jackie Alexander, Tanya Haynes, Lyndall Gill, and many, many more. But more importantly, though, as interpolated by the 40 women participants featured in the work, is a thing of pure beauty. I opened a copy of the text for the first time this morning, and I cannot tell you how much I am inspired to keep going. I am delighted at the future of reading erotic cartographies with our community of doers and thinkers, and I look forward to citing this work as there's so much you have given us by way of conceptual and methodological pearls. The Nita Barrow unit of the IGDS is extremely proud of you, Dr. Ghisyawan. We are inspired by you, and we are honored to be co-hosting an event which celebrates you and your signal achievement. On a personal note, Krystal, you have my heartfelt congratulations on the publication of this wonderful work. I often have to be reminded that we are not, in fact, you are not in fact an IGDS St. Augustine unit graduate, but I see that as a matter of formality. For me, you've always been and will remain part of our IGDS family, and like family ought to show up for each other. Know that we're right here with you, brimming with pride and joy in this moment, and we'll be here for many more celebrations of this kind. Peace and blessings all. We invite you to celebrate with Dr. Ghisyawan and her family. And of course, you must purchase the book. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you so much. Congratulations, 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 Dr. Ghisyawan. And of course, I must say thank you to Dr. DeShong as we partner together for this auspicious, fantastic Friday. Fantastic, because Krystal has drawn our attention to a really unique way of looking at subjectivity. I think Dr. DeShong has done well to establish the relevance, the value, the heuristic development, the epistemological perspective and contribution of your work. So what I would want to say, other than big you up real big, which I'll do at the end, is to say that I think the great value of your work is demonstrating the significance of space and place. We spend so much time understanding how discourses and systems and structures contribute to identifications, be it by self or by those we interact with. But you show how these sites form or mediate our sense of who we are, who we can be, who we are allowed to be, and how we can transcend those limits. So I think for anyone who's buying this book, and I'm waiting to get my crisp new copy close to me so I can sit, and there are no restrictions on the beach, so I can sit on the beach and read. I think this is where you see how people define themselves, particularly women loving women, defining self and confronting the significant mediating effect of space and place. So I think if you have an opportunity, you get your copy on that grounds. Secondly, I do strongly believe that it also tells us or expands our understanding of subjectivity, expands our understanding of gender relations, and another site where we can analyze gender being at the center and sexuality being at the center, gender justice. So I really do appreciate the value that your work brings there. With that said, I would like to say a special congratulations. As Halimah said, once you enter IGDS, it's like Hotel California. And we claimed you, and I had the privilege of sitting in class with you. And I do appreciate how you bring your extreme and unique breadth and depth of analysis to this work, and expect that you will bring more. So congratulations. I think it's happening at the right moment when it's fantastic, and we are in deep Tobago for that moment of celebration. And you've given us an opportunity to smile, celebrate, and rejoice in trying times with so much that's going on globally. So Krystal, Dr. Ghisyawan, allow me to call you personally, Krystal, congratulations. And really and truly, get your copy of this book. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. DeShong and Dr. Barratt, for bringing us such amazing, beautiful, and sincere welcomes and remarks from the institutes, both of our units that are really, we are so pleased to be able to do this with you today, Krystal. And it is my pleasure now to introduce us. I'm moving us along as your host onto the next part of our program. We are really, this is just such a delight and such a joy to have with us this evening, Shivanee Ramlochan, author of Everyone Knows I Am a Haunting, and she's going to bring us our poetry interlude. So everyone, please sit back, listen, enjoy, resonate, and let us take in the powerful beautifulness of Shivanee.
Hello, everyone. It's such an honor and a delight to be here sharing space with each of you, and particularly with Krystal, whom I've known for a long time. When I met Krystal, we were in very early stages of the work that would, in part, go on to define us, because certainly you can never define a person singly by what they do. But I was struck immediately and forcefully by how passionate, committed, and meticulous Krystal was to her scholarship. And I've been truly delighted to see that that has only grown over the years. When I met Krystal, I was very quiet about my own queer identity and the queer activism I would go on to do. And it is such an honor to share this space years after, when I've come to live that part of my life much more openly. Thank you, Krystal, for being part of this community, for sharing this astounding work, and congratulations on EROTIC Cartographies. I'll read 3 poems, 2 of which are from Everyone Knows I Am a Haunting, 1 of which is new. All of them are queer. Catching Devi and Shakuntala. Pull the girl out of that body tonight. Be her grandmother, sifting flour through fingernails, swelling roti like bruises under skin. Be her mother, bound for Brasso with a cocoa pod, wet under her book of bhajans. Be the daughter that rises from her, short-skirted and full-flamed, improbable and dark-skinned, like wet mango leaves, slick with puja oil in your palms. In a house, on a hill, giving birth to the sea. All your daughters are waiting. In the arms of the mangrove, snaking under Mosquito Creek. All your mothers are braiding. In the kajal your grandmother wept out before her wedding. In the khalsa spilling over. In the bower of that Barakpur night. In your daughter's dark mouth on her lover. Their hair in oiled snakes weeping bright. Bindis licked askew and limping over kiss-cured skin, pleading. To pull every girl out of every body tonight. To ransom every woman from the 3 Canal. To cure every remedy in a ruined field. To tell your daughters to run, run, kiss, flee. I see that Lilith had been with thee again. Love, I saw our daughter in the grocery store again. This time, she discarded the old shoes because finally Her hooves are coming through. She was using her talons to tear through meat packets. Oh, honey, I frowned. Your mom is a vegan. Our daughter followed me to the produce aisle, and she chewed one carrot, sadly, to try to make me happy. It didn't take. She could barely tame the wild things of her teeth. We sat and talked in the trunk of my car for about 15 minutes afterwards. I offered to pay for her shopping. She said, "Mother, don't bother. I'm covered. I've got it sorted. Between the furnace and the fire and the pit of my stomach does all my flame charring anyway. I'm set for days." She said, "Tell Mom don't worry. I've got a nice place, no boys. I'm finishing up my degree and I don't dream of having fathers. Not anymore. You raised me well. You can't even tell where the roots of my hair used to be." She said, "I'm sorry I didn't want the same life as you both did. I guess that's what most mothers want to hear. Honey, oh honey, we did good. Lilith sends us love and photographs of her last kill. We made a mantelpiece of her baby antlers. We know how to breathe now, how not to be ungrateful. We love her. We just don't want the same things she did. That's all." Those two poems were from Everyone Knows I'm a Haunting. This one is from a limited edition chapbook, which was issued in response to the work of Trinidadian visual artist Wendy Nanan, specifically her Persona Suite, which was made in 1984, 2 years before I was born. It was a real honor to respond to Wendy's work. And this particular poem, which is called Convent, is about, well, in one sense, it's about lesbians at convent. And in another, it's about the very real fact that for most of my life, I certainly never thought I could live and embody my full self in my own island. And in spending time with Wendy's work, I was joyously confronted with all the ways in which that has changed, and all the ways in which queer desire can be expressed between two bodies that identify as female, and how desire and how love moves through even the most constrained spaces. Convent. Sugar, meet me under the blue staircase in the shape of a lover. I think there might be nuns buried right here. Don't be afraid. Don't let your white socked foot falter on this old step. Look down and you'll see the head of a virgin, split apart like something holy. See the blood, see it slick like oil. Watch it drip into the mouth of a halo. Oh, 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 oh. Sweetheart, we're already illegal before we found our way onto blue-lined paper. Tell me, between the rows of sweat-polished pews, you can see the face of a lover. Won't you meet me in the sacristy where we can lay side by side? Hands barely touch me. Touch me with your other holy hands, and we can fantasize about the girls who lie in bed with other girls, barely touching. The bells call so brightly in our eyes that they sound like heaven. Is it heaven, sweet girl? Or is it something we only know in the dark? Girl, I learn what to call you when our parents are happy and when all the nuns are at choir. I learn what to call you in the secret spine of the church graveyard amidst the skeletal chorus. I know what to say now when your heart is racing from netball practice, when my fingers find their way under your pleated skirt, when the class ring catches in the corner of your mouth and it's all blood and prayers and history class all the way home, and the wanting is relentless, like the Greek horses in textbooks that will do neither of us any good, that will be as useless as porn. Listen, if you wait for me, I'll wait for you. Can you be good? Sweet girl, can you be good? We've only got 2 years, 10 months, and 10,000 laws to go. Thank you. Congratulations, Krystal.
Thank you so much. I know that everyone is just applauding and moved, and oh, yes, take a breath, because that was so powerful. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Shivanee. Your words, your poetry, they help keep so many of us going. Honestly, thank you. So we are going to now have a book review by Dr. Rosamond S. King, Associate Professor of English and Director of the Wolfe Institute for the Humanities at Brooklyn College. This is pre-recorded. Unfortunately, Dr. King wasn't able to join us in person and live for tonight, but we do have her review as a recording, and so we will go to that now.
Congratulations, Krystal. Hello, everyone. I am Rosamond S. King, and I am so happy that technology allows me to be present at this launch to big up Krystal and this book and be part of the celebration. I can't remember exactly when I met Krystal, but I do know that it was when she was a student at UWI at the illustrious Institute of Gender and Development Studies. I do, however, remember the first time we bounced up on each other in a queer space. It was in that bar that shall remain nameless, that you had to walk up the stairs. It was on a 2nd or 3rd floor. And I remember it because I was a bit uncomfortable drinking and whining around a graduate student. But as many of you know, at that time, there were a relatively small number of people who were open about being a sexual minority in Port of Spain. And there was an even smaller number of spaces where we could socialize. So that meant that no boundaries were strictly or easily upheld. So we socialized together, we talked about academic and intellectual thoughts together as well. And it was a pleasure to get to know Krystal. The flexibility of boundaries, or boundaries that go in and out of focus, is also a theme in erotic cartographies. Krystal does a great job of situating herself in relationship to the material, and more importantly, to the people and the community that she is studying. In that way, I find the book very honest and even in some moments quite vulnerable. Anyone who knows me knows that I do not base my research on interviews on purpose, because people, unlike books, do not show up on time, change their mind about what they have to say or what they believe, and are liable to judge you and strips you up and down. It's really a serious thing dealing with real live people, and it's a big responsibility. So the fact that Krystal is a part of the community that she is researching enabled her a great deal of the insight that appears in this book. And I applaud you, Krystal, for the care with which you treat our communities. The metaphor of flexible, porous boundaries also applies to the functionality of erotic cartographies. It is absolutely a peer-reviewed, scholarly book with the appropriate citations and theories, all protocols duly observed. And it's actually quite a good read for academics and non-academics alike interested in Caribbean sexual minorities, especially women who love women, and of course, especially in Trinidad. As you read the book, you become invested in the woman. You want to see their maps, their erotic cartographies. And this is a book that has a number of pictures in it of images of the actual maps, and that's a lot of fun. And you also want to understand what Krystal sees in between the lines of their images. Almost 10 years ago, I published a book called Island Bodies, Transgressive Sexualities in the Caribbean Imagination. And at that time, you could count on one hand the number of academic books focused on the lives of Caribbean women who love women. I cannot tell you how pleased I am to see this body of work so rapidly expanding, and in particular to see erotic cartographies and its contribution to the field. This is the kind of book that I dreamed about reading when I was writing Island Bodies. So, what is the book about? In Krystal's own words, quote, erotic cartographies centers the woman's own discursive articulations of selfhood and space, focusing on how these women come to perceive what is real and known about their world through their unique intersectional standpoint. And of course, those unique standpoints are being woman, living in Trinidad, and this woman, she brings in women of different races and ethnicities as well. To put it simply, there is no book like this, with its unique combination of insight into Trinidadian women who love women, arrived at using the concept and methodology of mapping. This combination is really fresh, and it draws you in to see them again, what the maps the woman drew look like, and what obvious and hidden meanings the maps contain. She calls this subjective mapping. And of course, subjective meaning whoever gets to make the maps helps to decide what they mean and what gets included in them. And as Krystal points out, we, meaning Caribbean people, women who love women who are not white, we often do not get to make the maps that are set out to define our lives and the spaces in them. So it's incredibly important that she has encouraged women to create maps of whatever space they wanted, in whatever way they wanted. And again, if you look at the maps, the images are really different. The materials that they use to draw them are different, and they're not traditional maps. So it's very engaging. Using maps is also significant because it is a different way to come at understandings of the world. The visual engages a different part of our brain and can therefore reveal somewhat differently nuanced information than verbal answers alone to questions. The maps in Krystal's book are also important because they focus on self-determination, again, that subjectivity, not on what some of us call the trauma porn of the stereotype of Caribbean homophobia, and also not on pure celebration. The respondents answered Krystal's questions by drawing their own maps, and those maps and stories give us a true range of human experience, as well as the range of experiences of Trinidadian women who love women. Many of you present tonight know that when you tell people you study sexuality, they think you study sex, and sometimes their eyes get big. But the truth, of course, is much more complex. And drawing on Audre Lorde and other theorists, as she says in her title, Krystal is focused on the erotic, an expansive notion that includes but goes beyond sex. To quote the book, quote, understanding oneself as erotic means knowing and experiencing one's sexuality, spirituality, and entanglements. I love that word, entanglements. Entanglements in webs of power, termed erotic subjectivity, end quote. Krystal goes on to write that the erotic is both a state of consciousness and a type of practice, way of being in the world. To quote again from the book, she writes that the erotic, quote, encompasses an awareness of the body, the mind, and the spirit as connected. To really experience the erotic is to possess a certain knowledge of the self, end quote. Think about that. The erotic as knowledge of the self. You will learn a lot about women who love women in this book. And as you're reading, you might learn something about yourself as well. The maps in Krystal's erotic cartographies and her analyses of them show us places we might not otherwise have access to. By focusing on place, I hope that this book, combined with the work of Gloria Wecker, Audre Lorde, and so many other scholars that she cites, once and for all eliminates the notion that Caribbean women who love or have sex with other women do not exist or are so invisible and hard to find that our lives cannot be sources of knowledge. This is especially remarkable because you know how Trinitas give directions, right? Oh, you want to go there? Well, you go down the road and then you go so, and then you go so, and when you see the red house, that is not it. Yet it goes past that, and then you go so, and you go so, and you reach. So despite the fact that Krystal is a Trini, don't mind she the diaspora now, the maps of Krystal's interviewees and the larger map of the book itself give us excellent directions into the minds and lived experiences of women who love and have sex with other women in Trinidad. And of course, actually, the word so is also appropriate in this context, since sometimes it's used by Caribbean people to describe non-heteronormative folks, right? As in, I think she's so. If you read the acknowledgements of this book, and you should always read the acknowledgements, they are more about community, about family and what I like to call family, friends and comrades, than it is a list of hierarchical relationships. And that is also what I think this gathering is about this evening, bringing the massive together who support Krystal and her work and launching this book into the world to add much needed knowledge and analysis. I brought Krystal into one of my classes to teach my students and me about the subjectivity of mapping. She was a wonderful teacher and taught us about how we can use our own agency to create our own maps. And ever since then, I have been incorporating mapping assignments into my courses. So if you are a teacher or professor and you want to learn about subjective mapping from an expert, of course, you should read erotic cartographies. And then on top of that, you should invite Krystal to give a demonstration to your class. One of the last quotes I want to read from the book is about the importance of maps. She writes, quote, "Maps are images that combine vision, experience, and imagination." As a poet, as well as a critic and a human being who feels like I have to imagine that a better world is possible, I believe that imagination is invaluable as a tool, as a method, in and of itself. And of course, in this context, if we're going to talk about imagination, we have to invoke the late but forever director of imagination for CAISO, Colin Robinson. And Krystal has nods to Colin in the book as well. So now I want you to take a moment, and if you have something to write with in front of you, and a piece of paper or a napkin, that's great. If not, you don't need to get up. You can just do it in your mind with your eyes closed. And I want you to draw a map of a place that you feel safe. If you haven't read the book yet, this is one of the key prompts that Krystal gives to the woman whom she interviews. So again, I just want you to take a moment, and if you have a napkin, a piece of paper, you can draw it. If not, you can close your eyes, and I want to imagine a space that you feel safe. I hope that all of us have more than one place where we feel safe. And I know that for me, this gathering of these friends and family this evening, gathered by people connected to Krystal, is one of the places where I feel safe, where I feel welcome to come in and find my people. My last quote from the book, Krystal writes, quote, "Wherever we are is a space of survival." Thank you, Krystal, for erotic cartographies, and congratulations again on the launch of your first book. Good night.
And, you know, Rosamond is such just powerful and beautiful speaker. Rosamond has shared everything with us. I just want to thank her so much for bringing that offering to us. Really, it's its own beautiful offering and engagement with Krystal's work. And so we now turn to a book presentation by Dr. Krystal Ghisyawan, and I have the pleasure of introducing her. And yes, we are going to get into a little bio, because that is so very important in these celebratory moments, so all of us know who Dr. Ghisyawan is. It's really an honor to introduce Krystal tonight, who is not only a dear friend, but also a comrade and co-conspirator with me on a number of projects. We've done work on art and poetry. We created in 2015 and 2016 for 16 Days of Activism, to more recently research completed through the Sexual Culture of Justice project that Krystal led with Silver Lining Foundation. And our work really grew and our friendship grew through activism and engagement in Caribbean sexualities, not only as a field of study, but also thinking critically and engaging in the daily lived experiences and realities of same-sex loving people and LGBTQI+ people across our region, especially here in Trinidad. We talked through ways of knowing ourselves and this region that we love. I first got to know Krystal and her passion for this work with Rosamond in 2013 through a short course on critical sexualities that Rosamond and I co-created and designed and hosted through IGDS and CAISO. And our paths continued to connect when I moved to Trinidad. And tonight I just feel so blessed to celebrate with her the launch of this brilliant and powerful book. And Rosamond's review, of course, has given us so much to reflect on and consider as we all will run out after this launch and immediately order a copy of this brilliant book. And so a little about Krystal. Born and raised in Trinidad, Krystal is an Indo-Trinidadian queer scholar, activist, educator, and artist. Her research and writing has documented Indo-Trinidadian cultural forms, critiqued cultural practices like racial purity, ritual purity, specifically the religious purdah of menstruating women, and detailed the identity politics, personal resilience, and collective space-making practices of Trinidadian same-sex loving women. In her monograph, Erotic Cartographies, Decolonization and the Queer Caribbean Imagination, which we are celebrating this evening, she highlights the ways in which same-sex loving women embody their sexual identities to challenge normative colonial notions of Caribbean femininity, space, culture, and family, as defined through colonial discourse and enactments of power. Krystal graduated summa cum laude from York University with a double honors in anthropology and South Asian studies. She then pursued her PhD in sociology at University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, graduating with distinction in 2016. She went on to Rutgers Advanced Institute for Critical Caribbean Studies in 2016 to 2017 as a postdoctoral associate. Dr. Ghisyawan has also been active and involved in the Silver Lining Foundation in Trinidad and Tobago and is currently their director of research. She's done a number of research projects with them and worked on survey reports important national surveys, as well as guides and manuals for Silver Lining Foundation's teacher training program, focusing on conflict resolution and managing diverse classrooms. She currently runs a successful consultancy as a developmental and content editor based in Lawrenceville, Georgia. And without further ado, I would like to bring on Krystal to offer us a book presentation.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Halimah and Sue-Ann, for your openings, your kind words. And I remember when I met you all too, and being starstruck. Thank you to the IGDS for your ongoing support. As you have mentioned, and as Angelique just noted, I'm not technically a graduate of the Institute, but I am a student and a devotee of the Institute and all of the work that you continue to do that inspire me and the work that I continue to do as well. I want to thank Angelique and Tanya, who's unable to be here today, for your work in making today possible and for making me feel unworthy that you would give me this attention. I'm really taken aback. I'm very humbled by your presence, by your words, by all of the kindness that everyone has shown to me as a student up until today. Very much, I would not be here without you and your support. Thank you, Shivanee, for supporting this project of mine and for being here to commemorate its fruition with your gorgeous writing. Your poetry was very triggering, I must say, in good ways and bad. Thinking about ancestry, about legacy, about what it is we bring forward from our bloodlines and through our trauma and our practices. And then also remembering convent days and the little seeds of desire that was sown there and how they came to fruition later on in life. Not there though, I don't have any netball girls and or anything like that, but thank you for those words, Shivanee. And to Rosamond, that you moved me to tears repeatedly. I knew you would say something beautiful, but what you have said, it's so generous. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your continued support for my work and for what you have said today. I look forward to discussing the book further with Angelique and Dr. Attai, who I adore. As a very close friend of mine. You both have epitomized friendship and kinship for me as a queer Caribbean scholar. I want to thank my family for being here on Zoom, all of my friends. There are so many names, literally almost all of your names, the attendees. I know all of you personally. Thank you for coming. Thanks for being here, being part of this celebration with us. So I'm going to share my screen. I have prepared some slides. I'm going to try to be eloquent, but I make no promises, especially after Rosamond's very moving review. So what is today known as erotic cartographies began with a question. Where are the same-sex loving women in Trinidad and Tobago? And in 2012, when I was beginning this work, I didn't know how or where to find this community that I, by identity and by practice, knew I belonged to. As many dissertations and books begin, a personal problem spurred the project that would occupy almost 10 years of my life. To answer this question, I interviewed 40 women who loved women. They charted their safe spaces, half of them drawing maps and the other half using only their narrated stories. Cartographies in the book's title refers to this documentation of their space-making practices. It's about locating them within space, within the society, and within discourse. Cartographies refers to the art and the science of map making, to their personal experiences of spatial awareness, which inspires the cognitive act of mapping spaces as one comes to know them. And it's something that I'm seeing more so with my son as he explores a new space, the ways in which he learns what is safe, where is fun. Oh, here, there's a plug here, I can play with this. This is fun. So, we all engage in this cognitive act of mapping spaces, but it's not necessarily a conscious act. It's something that becomes habitual when, as we associate certain types of emotions and behaviors with different spaces. So having to do the mapping exercise is a way of drawing out those cognitive maps onto paper so that we can then view them and discuss them. Cartographies refers also to the temporal and affective spaces wherein coloniality persists, because in order to explore the women's erotic cartographies, we also have this discussion of the things that constrain them, or the spaces wherein they feel constrained and how those constraints come to be. And it also refers to the co-opting of normative spaces and the creation of counterpublics, which is the woman's claiming of spaces and how they create space. The second word I'm going to discuss, which is the first word in the title, the erotic, is another, oh, what's happening? Wait, where did my slide? Oh, there it is. It's something else that it needs to be defined within the text. It pertains to knowledge and personhood, knowing themselves. How do same-sex loving women know themselves? Who are they? In order to answer the question, where were they, I needed to understand as well, who are they, or who identifies in this way? How can I find them? So this question of the erotic looks at the sensual, the spiritual, and the political aspects of being. Their experiences as female-bodied, female-identified, queer women within their various social and political environments. It entails the families, friendships, schools, communities, workspaces, leisure spaces in the context of the nation and as other. And as other, the women understand that being same-sex loving is a disallowed identity. At the time of this research, it was still illegal. So it was an illegal criminal space, but also within the society, something that was not necessarily accepted. So it's a disallowed identity, one that positions them in a space of unbelonging, unfitting in identity categories. And chapter 1 of this book frames these concepts of queer belonging, invisibility, and the queer absented presence, which is not seeing queerness within racial, cultural, and ethnic categories. So queer erotic cartographies asserts that same-sex loving women strategically embody their sexual identities, both to challenge imposed subject categories and to contest their invisibility and exclusion from discourses of being. Additionally, chapter 1, which is the book's introduction, frames the way that the text takes up decoloniality, wherein the erotic is an essential principle. Lyndon Gill, who's here today, props to you, and Jafari Allen, among others, have taken to Audre Lorde's conceptualization of the erotic as a combination of the sensual, political, and spiritual selves. I embrace this notion, noting how women's sensual knowledge of self informs their spiritual practices and how the political, i.e. power, is always implicated in their action as well as their inaction. And I will selectively read from the text to talk more about how I understand and utilize the erotic in this book. I consider Lorde's articulation of the erotic as inclusive of two aspects. It is a form of consciousness and it is a mode of praxis. As a form of consciousness, it encompasses an awareness of the body, the mind, and the spirit as connected. To fully experience the erotic is to possess a certain knowledge of the self. This way of knowing is in itself decolonial, as it is experiential, subjective, unique, and often unable for one to verify. It is a way of knowing that is not sanctioned by Western knowledge. For Lorde and other decolonial scholars, this experiential knowledge is more authentic than imposed or taught knowledges, as it is through one's own sensual body, conscious mind, and transcendental spirit that one comes to know and experience the world. The erotic then refers to ways of experiencing the internal and external worlds of the self. Each person has a unique experience of the world. These combined experiences give rise to embodied knowledge, meaning what we know through our being in the world and our unique navigations of it. As praxis, the erotic refers to these ways of acting that are rooted in embodied and in spirited knowledge gathered through knowing the self. According to Lord, denial of the erotic curtails the possibilities of self-knowing and creates alienation from both action and consciousness of self, thus preventing purposeful action. So knowing the self becomes a directive for action or praxis. Knowledge gained from the erotic through knowing of the self and the community inspires new possibilities for organizing social life. It invokes a reconceptualization of knowledge and power to redefine how we know and operate within the world. The woman's intimate knowledge of their desires and their various identities, particularly religious and social class affiliations, are explored in the text as the main drivers of their actions. I borrow Emma Perez's term, queer decolonial praxis, to refer to these purposeful actions, whether negatively or positively experienced. Why is this not changing? There we go. Same-sex loving women's bodily and spatial acts constitute forms of queer decolonial praxis, contesting the erasure and social death enforced through colonial practices and discourse. For instance, women challenge the coloniality of knowledge through seeking their own understandings of self beyond what they are told, by individually seeking their spiritual self, and by rejecting the notion of singular monolithic identities, since they understand themselves to be multiple and intersectional. Their bodily acts, such as participation in religious or ritual practice, their ways of inhabiting various places, and their experiences of love in its various forms, all contest the limits placed on the body and knowledge of the body through colonial discourse. These knowledges empower the same-sex loving women interviewed in the study to claim space and voice through their queer decolonial praxis. So the activities that are discussed in the book are framed as queer decolonial praxis, or these routes through which the women are able to move against the knowledge that has been imposed on them, or the structures that have been imposed on the ways in which they are allowed to engage spatially and socially. Whether negatively or positively experienced, the spaces wherein the women engage in actions that are connected to or that facilitate their erotic knowledge form part of their erotic geographies. The title of the book, EROTIC CARTOGRAPHIES, refers to the process of mapping these erotic spaces, both cognitively in the imagination and literally on paper during the mapping exercise. So this is the table of contents, so the layout of the book. And in chapter 2, subjective mapping, this is where the book makes one of its bigger contributions through the explanation of utilizing subjective mapping as a queer decolonial methodology in qualitative research. The chapter guides researchers through the steps taken to use subjective mapping for data collection with same-sex desiring women, how I conceptualized the exercise and its prompt, how I integrated it into the interview, what the maps looked like and how they were interpreted, what elements were included in the maps, what spaces, what symbols, what ideologies. And the chapter is designed to be instructive. So it's written from my experience, like this is what I did, but there is room for researchers, students to draw from it, take what they need and build on it. It's by no means exhaustive or correct or incorrect or whatever, but it's merely what I did and how I perceive the method as bringing new insight in ways that we did not have before. For instance, How do the women conceptualize safety? It could be the absence of presence of a threat, such as criminal activity, partner abuse, parental friction, job dismissal, and discrimination based on one's perceived sexual orientation or gender, whether expression or identity, or being spied on via a fake profile on social media that might expose one's secrets. In these maps, both drawn by the same participant, Jane, on 2 separate occasions, 1 month apart, show her anxieties, more so in the map on the left, and her spaces of comfort, shown in the map on the right. The glass closet symbolizes the lack of privacy and feelings of exposure that she felt in Trinidad. And safety is represented by the house with the hedge instead of a tall wall or a barbed wire fence, which she drew from her experiences at a beachfront property in Dominica and another property in Blanchisseuse. So the house is a merging of those 2 spaces and those 2 experiences. The grid in the image on the right, group retreat, nice accommodation. It represents a group retreat that she experienced in the UK. And the drawing at the bottom, bed, table, that represents her bedroom in Port of Spain. And these are her safe spaces. And the smudge on the bed is soy sauce because we were having sushi in Movie Town and she dropped a little bit. But that's part of the mapping process, right? It's not just what happens in the map and what she's putting onto the paper from her past experiences, but also that moment, how she felt in that moment. So the map on the left represents a specific moment in time when she created it and her anxieties were more at the forefront versus the second map that she created because she ran out on the interview the first time. She had something to do and she had to leave. So we met a second time. And when we met the second time, the way she felt influenced the way that she drew this map. And we see more safe spaces in this second map. So it points to the way in which the method itself is not fixed, but it can be used at different points in time to show different things. The subjective is not constant or stable, it shifts, identity shifts, the way in which we relate to spaces and so on also shifts with time. The woman indicated that safety is not a constant experience in the same way that subjectivity shifts, safety shifts as things move in and out of the space, other people, if you're in some place different and a new person enters the space, it changes the way in which you can experience that space. Additionally, this chapter discusses the ways in which mapping and mapping as a process is decolonial. This is a quote from the book, Subjective maps are an example of this writing back against power by challenging accepted Western ways of knowing and being that privilege objective truths, and also by centering embodied knowledge, meaning that personal experiences, including one's various social identities, biases, and relations to space and persons are centered and used to facilitate knowledge of wider contexts and general truths. So the maps are not fixed. The maps are not fixed in time and they're not fixed representations. Instead, they refer to what the map maker is feeling in that moment. And so it represents a partial truth. What is true for the map maker in that moment? What story is being told by the map and whose story is being told by the map? As author documents, maps carry the interest, biases, and motives of the authors, so they are subject to change. Attention to these maps allow for the interrogation of spatial commonalities and shared histories of a group that remain near invisible within Caribbean society, to use Rosamond's term. The book is divided into parts. So the first part, the introduction and the methodology, sort of frame the text. And then the next 2 parts look at the discussion of spaces. So in part 2, which consists of chapters 3 and 4, I discuss how public and private spaces are mediated by class, race, sexual orientation, and gender. Social class in particular differentiates how women experience gender policing in various public and private spaces. Both chapters highlight the continuities of violence in discourse, structure, and interpersonal relations across these spaces. Throughout chapter 3, for instance, I return to the experiences of gender transgressive, butch lesbians, or non-binary people, and examine how their experiences challenge the assumptions that we have about Caribbean sexualities. How are these assumptions created, perpetuated, and policed in public spaces? The map shown here highlights the anxieties associated with public spaces. The section on the right, because this is one map and there's a line that separates safe and unsafe. So the unsafe section represents the city and the anxieties experienced with being in the city. The women's interaction with local and foreign spaces shape their subjective understandings of these spaces, wherein meanings of queer and Caribbean are produced and disseminated. For instance, what does it take for same-sex loving women to feel safe locally in cities and specific places within them, like clubs, bars, malls, shopping centers, parties, and fests? What do they experience when they go to these places? Even within the region, the treatment of same-sex desiring and gender non-conforming people is not uniform. Two participants that I call Nina and Ethyle, they describe being openly queer in Barbados because they were seen as outsiders, as Trinidadian students temporarily studying there. But they would be closeted when they were at home in Trinidad or when they went to Jamaica, where they felt that homophobia was more palpable. Women who traveled further abroad, like the US, Canada, and England for work, school, or leisure, were mainly allowed to do so because their social class allowed it. Their travels exposed them to different ideas of queerness and inclusivity. For Black femme Kelly, she was happy in North American cities, while Black non-binary Reagan was accosted in Montreal because she did not fit the norm or the expectation of Black femininity. These contexts differ culturally and are seats of colonial power in their own way, but Reagan's gender representation marked them as contrary to the normative order, needing to be policed and disciplined. But policing does not only occur in public spaces. The private too is subject to policing from those within and outside of it, including religious, moral, and sexual policing carried out by parents, the community, and the state. Chapter 4 discusses the various ideological, affective, and practical aspects of home, including the ways in which it can be fraught and controversial. While privacy can bring protection, keeping the woman from experiencing shame and discrimination, they all suffered from a lack of privacy in some way, such as sharing a home with family or friends while not being out, having family members go through their belongings behind their backs, or being the subject of gossip. They must also contend with various forms of violence, symbolic, physical, sexual, and financial, meted out by families and intimate partners. Seeking help could mean risking exposure as same-sex loving. Thus, the woman learned how to navigate discursive, structural, and interpersonal violence. Additionally, this chapter assesses how same-sex loving women negotiate and organize their domestic lives through relations with kin, cohabitation, marriage, sharing labor in the household, or idealizing a space for oneself and one's kin that they hope to one day actualize. The narrative of exile perpetuates the myth that the queer must leave the Caribbean to be free and happy. And for some women, while they did see their ideal life only being possible in a space abroad, this chapter shows that for many women, their homemaking occurred in Trinidad, and that was the only home space for them. As Rosamond highlighted, the porosity of boundaries is a persistent theme within the book, and it emerges in all of the chapters. In chapter 3, we see some of this when we talk about traversing boundaries of space, of identities, and of gender. The women do not all experience the same boundaries or barriers to accessing various spaces, but their experiences show border policing at work. And in turn, their strategies for evading these borders that keep them from meeting others in the community. people who are in some way different from them, whether by social class, race, or gender identity. And in part 3 of the book, I focus a bit more on the boundaries that keep them from understanding parts of themselves, their own self. What inhibits understanding and acceptance of one's whole self? So the third portion of the book, State, Religion, and Personhood, considers how religion and religious organizing have shaped the macro and micro worlds of same-sex loving women in Trinidad, from their engagements with religious discourses and communities to their concept of self. Religion is important to the diaspora because of the cultural erasure and acculturation that occurred with colonialism. It permeates almost every aspect of life and has implications for how same-sex loving women are able to conceptualize and embody their sense of self. The participant Reagan created this map to highlight their experiences of alienation from Christianity through their mother's belief in anti-gay ministries and the lecturing that they received on accepting Christ and disavowing their attraction to women as a way to heal them from depression and anxiety when they sought treatment at a government-run facility for mental health. So that's why the church and the mental health facility are both on the same side here of this drawing, because they are so much connected. Other women interviewed experienced exclusion because of religious ideals and institutionalized homophobia in churches and Hindu temples. It is not so simple or straightforward to claim decolonization as a reclamation of things from a time or space prior to colonial influence, as there is no pure place or time. Instead, it must be recognized that colonialism extends its reach through various mechanisms from different ideologies and spaces. So when talking about Indo-Caribbean identity, for instance, and specifically Hinduism, it gets very muddy, as Hinduism has a colonizing influence in South Asia. So in this chapter, I talk a bit about that history and Hindu nationalism and the life that it's taking on currently in South Asia, and the way that it's unfair to a lot of people. So I take up that discussion in chapter 5 and talk more about how Indo-Caribbean women use the Hindu mythology as a way to find themselves in chapter 6. And chapter 6 is where I have that particular discussion. In dealing up with the spirit, spiritual knowledge, and erotic fulfillment, this chapter muses on the nature of the self, the spirit, the soul, or consciousness, and explores the woman's spiritual practices through which they can know the self authentically, even within the context of religious nationalism and homophobia. So while some women in the study have found places of acceptance within their religion, many chose to carve out their own path. Spirituality then is not divorced of religion, but it is also not necessarily attached to it either. Spirituality offers more flexibility and personal direction of one's cosmic development, which same-sex loving women found essential if they were to detach from the toxic beliefs they held about themselves, or from the mistreatment they were already receiving from institutionalized forms of religion in Trinidad. Apart from ritual practices and prayer, imagination and creativity are also expressions of the spirit, as they represent selfhood and intersubjectivity. As Jaya, one of the 40 women in my study, called it, literary activism was their way of engaging in social movements by sharing their voice and perspective based on how they knew and understood themselves, their surroundings, and their positionality within the society as sensual, spiritual, and political beings. The 40 women I met with were from various ethnic backgrounds, various educational and socioeconomic backgrounds. They racially identified as Caucasian, Chinese, African, Indian, and of mixed descent, and they ranged from ages 19 to 45 at the time of the interviews. They were from various urban and rural areas across Trinidad, each having their own daily routes and routines. They also varied in their religion, how they chose to sexually self-identify, some refusing to pick a label and others choosing more than one, including lesbian, bisexual, queer, pansexual, and fluid. And while the book reflects the nuances of these identities, another area where it makes a critical addition to the field of Caribbean sexuality studies is in the attention to Indo-Caribbean women's same-sex desire. So in this chapter, for instance, I look at the mythology, like the Ardhanarishwar, here half woman god, like Mohini and Arjuna. And I can talk more about this in Q&A if anyone is interested. But these mythologies offer a glimpse into the ways that Indo-Caribbean women use their ancestral tradition to understand themselves as sexual beings and to reclaim power by affirming their same-sex loving identities that would otherwise be rejected and shamed even within Hindu discourse. It is important to recognize the connections of Hinduism in the diaspora to that in South Asia, but also to recognize the differences, which I take up in the previous chapter. Ultimately, this book is about transformation of the systems of oppression, of our conceptions of selfhood, of our societal norms. All that together can constrain us. It centers love, a common message within the woman's spiritual experiences and their sensual experiences. And the love has also come to be a motivator for their political action. As a technology of social transformation, love facilitates understanding ourselves, each other, the nature of being, and collectivity in the contemporary postmodern world, which in turn fosters social action and identity construction. Love incites action towards political goals. It inspires coalition consciousness, cooperation, and bridge building. Love is political. It is implicated in relations of power, and it takes different forms in different relationships. Love of God, of family, of friend, of partner, and love of self. These various forms of love are bodily, entailing specific acts, and spiritual, necessitating connection. Through consciousness and connection, a revolution can occur, a revolution capable of healing our wounds, the wounds left by oppression and trauma. Again, as I finish, I want to thank you all for being here today to celebrate this work, and I hope you carry forward the book's imperative to bring about transformation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Krystal. This was just so breathtaking and, really beautiful to hear you describe at length your work. I think it is so important, especially as this being your first book, and the contributions that you have offered to us, especially as we think about the contributions to Caribbean sexuality studies, how we think and understand desire, and your really just unique approach to decolonial methodologies. You've given us so much to work from, to reflect on, and to think about. And so now we're going to move into a conversation with you. And I would like to ask Nikoli to join us. Hi, Nikoli. And what we wanted to do, is really, we want to have an opportunity to talk to you about, especially what the powerful work that you were doing when we think about your approaches. For me, I'll start with some of my thoughts, what resonates me most powerfully for this book, and then Nikoli will share, and then we have some questions for you. One of the things that because I had the great joy, I should say, of being able to review the book for Rutgers University Press. And so I had an early version and I was able to pour into the book. And I also had the opportunity to work with you, Krystal, on earlier drafts of this book. So I feel, just sort of growing with it, and then seeing what you did with the book. I am just incredibly blown away And I am so thrilled that you have brought this into the world. It feels like, as Rosamond said, this is the book we all needed. This is the book we were looking for. And I'm just so happy it exists. And I am so excited to engage with it. And so one of the things that I focused on in my review of the work is that, first of all, you offer such an important, unique decolonial methodology. And for me, this has become a part of my own research that I'm very, very preoccupied by. And it's something that I think deeply about. And it's something that I think we so need. In your subjective mapping, of course, this is entirely unique, something that you have created, as Rosamond said. No one has done this before, right? And so what an amazing feat, what an amazing way to say, yes, I invented this. And that is highlighted by, as Dr. DeShong shared already, we've been teaching your subjective mapping from the really important Caribbean research on gender and sexuality studies textbook by Dr. DeShong and Professor Campadou. We're also happy about that book and that your contribution to it, which comes from your work from EROTIC Cartographies, it has been so inspiring and important for students, especially students in the Caribbean doing Caribbean feminist work, to think and reflect on how to create, how to invent, and how to engage in methodologies that are particular to our region, particular to the context in which we exist and live. So I find the subjective mapping, your intersectional feminist praxis, that just so clearly demonstrates really complex understandings of safety, visibility, place, identity, and queerness. And for me, most importantly, EROTIC Cartographies locates and affirms queer Caribbean belonging. And I want to say that again, Caribbean queer belonging. And, this is something that, is so, we cannot understand how important it is for this work that you do. You affirm our sense of self and belonging through the ways that you bring the stories to life, the way that you've examined lived experiences, creativity, spirituality, and erotic subjectivities. It is fierce and powerful and defiant. And so I want to say thank you for writing this book. Thank you for the work, the 10 years of work. I think it's so important also for us to know how long it takes to do this kind of work, the labor involved, and the fact that you kept on it, you kept working through it to produce this most beautiful, powerful, and important work. And we know that folks are going to be taking it up, and I myself cannot wait to further engage in it. Nikoli, take us away.
Good evening from Toronto, everyone. My heart is in Trinidad on this fantastic Friday, but here I'm stuck in snow. I'd first like to just start by as well thanking Krystal for this really important work. Krystal, I met you maybe 10 years ago when this project was, you were completing the PhD, the project was getting off the ground, and I'm really honored to see this book in the flesh, to be able to hold it and read it on the subway while I'm moving around the city, and really to also be able to think with you. We're really interested in a lot of the same kinds of questions around, as Angelique was saying, just queer belonging in the Caribbean and all the nuances and complicities, all the entanglements that queer belonging presents in the Caribbean. And so today we're talking about maps. And there's a way that normative maps bound us. And that's really profound in terms of your contribution about queer maps and thinking about our colonial history and how our histories of colonization has bounded us in the Caribbean region and what these kinds of maps mean for us. And I'm really excited and humbled by the kind of care that you take in retelling these stories and representing these maps that queer people, queer Caribbean women create, queer Trinidadian women create, and really making sense and understanding and coming to terms with their experiences. And I'm really happy to see that you give us this new vocabulary, this new method of thinking about queerness. Rosamond mentioned, that moves away from the oppression Olympics, thinking about homophobia and transphobia and discrimination in the region. and really also putting yourself in conversation with people. We have Lyndon Gill here, people like Rosamond King, Gloria Vecca, Jafari Allen, also, expanding our knowledge of queer experiences in the Caribbean. So, and, I'm really happy that you show us that, and you remind us that the queer experience is really informed and influenced by the deeply complicated kind of social, cultural, political geographies in the Caribbean, but how these also make queerness such a vibrant and live and exciting thing in the Caribbean, despite the nuances and the kind of complications that queerness entails. I'm really excited to, again, also continue sitting with this book, teaching this book out here in Toronto, and really also thinking about what this means for conversations happening in the diaspora when we think about queerness and how the queer Caribbean is represented in a lot of kind of normative mainstream queer discourse. And, I'm really excited to share this book here in Toronto with my students. And, really, yeah, just all the amazing things that this book will represent as we continue thinking about queerness. I look forward to our conversation today, and from the chat I'm seeing, I'm really happy to see what this work is already doing and what it will do when more of us get our hands on the book.
Yes, and we have some excellent questions, which we're going to get to in just a few moments. But Nikoli and I wanted us to talk a little bit about, we have two questions for you to think through, and we can talk about it. And I think, what struck me, Nikoli and Krystal, is that the number of times that we've done presentations together or roundtables where we have put together the kind of, these are, we want to talk about livable, like what does it mean to think about having livable spaces and lives. We were on a panel together about rebellious praxis, for example, at the Beyond Homophobia conference in Jamaica. Nikoli and Krystal, you both did some work together on a panel. I think that was the last conference, talking specifically about how do we do this research? How do we study Caribbean sexuality and the lived experiences of people on the ground? How do we do so with a particular kind of ethics of care? And this is, of course, something that Rosamond and I wrote about in our Embodied Theories article. And I just want to say and ask, and Nikoli, jump in, but I wanted us to think a little bit about, Krystal, how this responsibility of stories, if you could share a little bit with us about your process. It's very clear that you forge deep relationships with the participants, with the people that you worked with in creating this work, and the stories that you share, and in that telling and retelling. And it is very clear that you do so much to ensure that no one is made more vulnerable as a result of this work. And so if you could share a little bit, and Nikoli, please add and jump in too, because Nikoli, your work has also been very careful around sharing the experiences. There's a sense of responsibility when you were writing about sexuality and you're writing about Caribbean queerness and Caribbean queer people and all the ways that we define ourselves: lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, intersex, queer, same-sex loving, etc. So I would love to hear you all talk a little bit about that. What does it mean for you? And Krystal, most of all, how do you see that coming through in this book?
Thank you very much for the question, Angelique and Nikoli. From the very beginning of doing the research, it was a challenge just to get people to speak to me. So from the beginning, I had to establish that who I was, because I came out of nowhere. I had just finished my undergraduate work in Toronto, and when I didn't know, I really did not know where to find people. Like, I legit didn't know where to find people. Like, I had my crushes. I knew some women who were queer, but they were not interested in talking to me. And because of the situation in their lives, they weren't interested in sharing their stories or being made vulnerable by having that experience of just talking about what it's like for them. But I knew women, I knew through my friendships what they had gone through. And that pushed me to do the research in the first place. Having seen people not be able to express themselves. They can't dress the way they want. They can't have the friends that they want and bring them around their family. They can't do that. And then to be in Toronto and meet people there who were open and who were able to talk about their sexuality and their friendships, it drove me to want to do something to create change, because I felt like this shouldn't be simply that you shouldn't have to hide who you are. You shouldn't have to be unhappy because the optics of your desire, it's not favorable for your family. They don't want to see that. They don't want you to be this person. So then you must sacrifice your entire existence to make everybody else happy, but you can't be happy. So that is what I wanted to change, that experience where people can experience joy and they could experience happiness in their life by just being able to be themselves. So that is what propelled me to do this research in the first place. And it pushed me to become an activist as well. How do I bring about change in our society so that people can just exist and not have to deal with all of these pressures, and so that's the beginning of the research. And the trying to find people to open up and talk to me was really hard. Nobody wanted to. I posted on Facebook for many months, and I participated in Facebook groups as a way to establish my presence and portray myself as safe. I had to be safe. I had to become a safe space in order for these women to even begin to share with me. And in the book, I do talk about that process and what it took for them to confide in me. And I even began to ask the question, why did you agree to do this interview? It became part of the process because I had so many no's and so many people who they would be online and they would post and they would have events and orchestrate retreats and whatever for queer community, but they don't want to talk to me anyway. They're doing these things to create safe space for other queer women, but they're not interested in having the conversation about it because I'm still a risk. It's still exposure. They still couldn't see, they couldn't stand to lose what they had gained by building up the walls of privacy and creating these niche communities for themselves. So I had to first establish that I'm a safe space. What you say to me will be safe. I will protect you. And then in the course of writing, I had to do that as well by changing people's names, referring to places differently so that they're not exposed in any way. And so I had to become part of this community, which was joyful for me because I wanted to anyway, like my mom is here. I don't know if she's still here, but when I started it, her question to me was, are you gay? That's why you're doing this work? And it was a little bit, there was some anxiety for her asking this question because of all of the respectability politics that, for her, she felt like, me being queer in the same way that the woman that I knew, their families were like, oh, well, it reflects on us. And what does that mean to reflect on us? And what does that mean for me? And it took, having to change the way that even she viewed the topic for her to come around and see the work that I was doing and why I was doing it and why it was important. And also to meet you all and spend time with you all. Many of you have met my mom, right? I bring her to things because that is what it takes for me to be able to be the researcher, because I had to be authentic. I had to be authentic with myself and with my family and all of my existence to say that if you trust me with your story, I'm going to take care of it. And, that's what I strive to do with the book, to be able to share these women's stories, because what researchers tend to do is the word, I just had it, appropriate appropriate knowledge. We take knowledge from people who have it, and we say, well, look at what I found, or this is what I found, and whatever. And it's the same kind of thing. We're celebrating me and my book and my writing of this book, but it's not really my words. A lot of it, when you read it, it's not my words. I'm saying what they said. I'm taking their words. I'm giving you their stories. I'm bringing their stories to life for you, and for to hear that I did that well is so validating for me. Hi, Kitty. Because that was my goal. I wanted it to feel like I'm not stealing their stories. I'm not taking it. I'm showing you them. I'm bringing them to you. And to hear that I did that well, it really assured me that I did the right thing. And how I went about that, because that was your question, like how did I go about it? I forgot some people's names because I only use the pseudonyms at some point. Like I just took myself away from it in that way as well. Like if I don't know who this person is, I can't expose them. But it's not that I didn't know or remember who they were, but I psychologically had to distance myself in order to bring them back and put them forward and say, this is who's telling the story. Like this person is, this is their experience. And I really wanted to capture their emotion and the way that they told the stories. Like there was so much feeling and hurt when people talked about the rejection that they face from their family, or being in church and have like somebody who's close to you learning that you're gay and then saying, oh, well, I don't want to touch you. I can't hug you anymore. I can't be with you anymore. There was so much pain in the telling of the stories, and then also so much joy that I wanted to put their emotions forward as much as possible, so that when the reader picks up the book, they don't see me, they see them.
Good, thanks for that, Krystal. Even if I could jump in as well, I think to the time when we both started this research, I think it continues as well. We inherited a lot of baggage. And in my experience, when I was going into the field, when I was doing research on trans communities in Trinidad, and then continuing that research in my PhD, a lot of persons, mentioned feeling that they were taken advantage of by other researchers coming in doing interviews and stuff, and they'd be inheriting that baggage of kind of very voyeuristic research being done on queer Caribbean people. And even for me, and so my research, it took me to the streets to Murray Street in Trinidad, to the rum shops where working class trans women partied, where they did sex work and so forth. So even also, I like how you talk about being seen as safe and building that trust in the field. And what this means, as thinking about the ethics of care that we have to be very mindful of in doing this kind of research and really telling these stories. And because, as you rightfully said, these words they easily become ours when we write this book, we publish, and these narratives circulate in academic spaces and not any spaces that we necessarily did the research in. And I remember when doing my research, one of the first questions I got from some of these trans women was, oh, wow, you actually could tell our story. And for a lot of them, it was the first time that someone gave them the space to just tell me a story. Tell me about why La Perouse Cemetery in Port of Spain is a space that you feel safe, right? Kind of thinking through your method of mapping. So I'm really just wondering if you could comment on what this method of mapping means as a decolonial praxis for thinking about queer experiences in the Caribbean.
Yeah, no, so the process itself, mapping and taking this subjective experience and putting it onto the paper, that in itself is decolonial in the sense that it's looking at the subjective experience. So when we have to kind of backtrack a little bit to talk about what does it mean for there to be coloniality in knowledge, right? So when we talk about knowledge production, it means how we know what we know, how knowledge is represented, where it comes from, who's the producer of the knowledge, where the voice is coming from. So what we know about ourselves, what we know about the Caribbean, what we know about queer, where is that coming from, right? Who is the speaker? Who is giving us this knowledge? In this research, it pertains to also to me, the self, right? Me as a person, how do I know who I am as a queer person, as a woman within this society, as a non-binary person? What are the different discourses that shape my perspective? And those things are colonial in the sense that they come from elsewhere. These are imported knowledges. They are based on more moral discourses, based on religious discourses. Also, if we look at your work, what you do, Nikoli, queer liberation politics, the contemporary discourse of sexual rights, of human rights, and how personhood is framed within these discourses, and how queerness is framed within these discourses, it shapes the way that we position ourselves and think about ourselves as queer Caribbean people. So what the method does, it asks the woman to explain themselves. How do you know who you are, and what are the knowledges that impact you or your way of thinking? So in this sense, it unpacks and kind of shows the different ways in which they come to learn about themselves, and then the ways in which they resist this knowledge as well. So for instance, not claiming a sexual identity, that is decolonial, by saying, no, I don't pick your labels. I don't even need one of your labels. I am who I am, period. That's it. Why do I need to name my desire, right? Because do straight people have to come out as straight? No, only queer people have to come out as queer, because straight is the norm and queer is not the norm. So by just deconstructing that and saying, well, people can just be people, is something that it means undoing that normative set of knowledge about sexuality and what is accepted and then what is not accepted, and then how that just that concept filters into every single thing in our society, in the law, in what we learn about biology, what we learn about medicine, about everything, right? Even which bathroom you're going to use. It's based on these ideas of the body and of the person. So first off, we had to engage with this idea of the self and deconstruct that. So the subjective aspect looks at the knowledge that is within the person, because when we think of research, anthropology, sociology, cartography, these were all colonial subjects. They were fields of study that emerged through the process of conquering and domination. So older or initial anthropological studies were, well, the armchair anthropologists, for instance, they based their writing on the records of missionaries and explorers and so on. So they're literally taking the information from explorers and those people who are doing the work of colonizing, and then using that to inform our understandings of different cultural groups. So beginning at those points, these fields have grown from that way of engaging with the other. The subject of study is that other entity. And the way that we view the other is based on, being objective, not tarnishing your objectivity by having an emotional connection to the subject, which is what we're undoing with this method by being subjective and saying, well, we're going to look at the people having voiced themselves first off, and then by being part of the community. So I'm not risking going native because I am native. We are the native researcher. How do we straddle those boundaries of being the native, being the participant, being the researcher and the observer all at the same time? And that has to do with the way that we position ourselves within the field regarding our subjects, and then how we take the knowledge that we know. So in the book, I say that I use we. There are some points where I use we when referring to same-sex loving women, because I'm including myself in that experience. There are sometimes when I say they, because I'm referring to a specific subset, and I try to be definitive in my language with who I'm referring to and who I'm talking about, who I'm giving voice in that moment, right? Because the lines are blurry. There are boundaries, and the idea of these bounded categories is something that is colonial. It's something that is imposed, that this group belongs here, this group belongs there. And in the practice of research, we create these bounded categories as a way to view the other. So we had to undo that. That needed to be undone. And then the mapping process itself, by focusing on the subjective knowledge, by allowing the women to translate their own ideas, centering their voices and emotions, those are all things that I already touched on. But the map also challenges the ways that we think about space and time. That's something that needed to be unpacked as well. The way that we think about time as linear doesn't really exist, because time operates within our imagination as well. And the maps show the timelessness, but also time specificity. Like when I showed Jane's maps and the 2 maps that she produced, there is a time specificity with her subjective experience and how she creates these maps at those specific points in time. But there's also a timelessness to the map, in that it's based on experiences that occurred at different points in time. There is a layering of meaning. There is this palimpsest, where time is not singular or linear, but rather layered. And there's also anachronisms, things that occur out of time that are not necessarily fixed to that point, but they bring in these different experiences from different points in their life. And there's even reference to the future. So it's not only about past, but also about their future, about visioning and envisioning. And that is part of that decolonial process as well, being able to utilize imagination to envision something different, to see a different world, and then to go out and create that different world. Another thing that I was going to do with this book, like I really struggled with the process of publishing the book, and not because of it being tedious, which it is, but because I wanted it to be different. I just wanted a different medium. I wanted it to reach the people who needed it, and I didn't necessarily want it to come through traditional channels. And my mentors who I shared this with were like, no, you're going to commit suicide for your career. Please don't do that. Like, please go the traditional route, publish in the traditional way in order to maintain my career. And that's part of the problem with academia as well, is that we're stuck in the bounds, right? We have to check the boxes if we want to continue to exist within this field. And it was an issue that I had with this book in particular, because I really wanted it to be something different. I really wanted it to reach out of academia. And, I hope that it's still able to do that with my work, my activist work that I'm doing, and by allowing members of the community to access it and discuss it.
Absolutely. I was going to say, Krystal, you've done that. Please know you've done that. Please know that you have done that beautifully and powerfully. And thank you so much for breaking that down. And we are running very much out of time. So I just want to quickly get us to some of these wonderful questions. But if Krystal, if you can jump in the Q&A and you can answer some questions live, but I think we can address some of them together. Prof. Muhammad says, so much of cartography is visualization. The cover is very intriguing. I'm so glad we have this question. I'm interested in the cover image and how it filters into the content and message you immediately convey to the reader, the juxtaposition between the text title and the image selected. And we should say very proudly that this is actually Krystal's own artwork. So tell us a little bit, Krystal, about your cover.
So I created this painting. It's a painting that I did in watercolor with my friend Emmanuel Martinez. It was the day after Boxing Day 2016. Him and I in his living room, we were painting and unwinding, lonely souls in the Christmas season. We baked a cake, we ate the whole thing. So it was just us in that moment, just creating something of ourselves. And it was during my time at Rutgers where I was working on the book. I was there learning about decoloniality and learning from the esteemed scholars there like Nelson Maldonado Torres and others whose work has really influenced my thinking. So the art that I created was just what I felt in that moment. It really was just an expression of me. And like I say in the book, imagination and creativity, it's expressions of the soul. And when it came time to pick something for the cover, I could not pick anything else. Like I had the painting, it was there, and it's very unique in its shape and its figure. It's that fluidity of female sexuality. At the time when I was painting it, it was meditative. The orbs that are emanating from the yoni, it's this field of feeling and sensation and vibration and reverberation, and it's just this growing sensation that keeps giving and giving. It's orgasmic. I love it. So that's
yes,
why
it's orgasmic. Absolutely.
That's why I chose it. There could be nothing better. It's messy and it's beautiful and colorful, and it represents everything that female sexuality embodies, right?
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much. That was, yeah, absolutely. When I saw it, I was like, this is perfect. Joanna asked some really good questions about geography and geographical tools and frameworks. And so I wonder if you could say just a little bit about how, in your experience, how did geography and geographical tools and frameworks elevate queer sexuality studies?
Yeah, because it's not there. There's some work in critical geographies that touch on queer sexualities and queer spaces and so on, but it didn't really exist for Caribbean sexuality. So being able to take from critical geography and bring it to Caribbean sexuality studies, it provides a new lens. There were a few works, one anthropologist, William Leap, one sociologist, Yvette Taylor, one geographer, Gavin Brown, that had used mapping in their work, but it was slightly different in the way that they applied it. So in the book, I talk in more detail about this. So it was a way of literally bringing queer Caribbean women to the map and saying that we are here and we exist. And as Rosamond pointed out, it's a way of visualizing things differently, that we can see the way in which we interact with space and how space influences our everyday life. We take for granted that we are governed by the rules of space. We do operate according to the rules of space. So the mapping was a way to challenge those norms and those understandings, right?
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. And I'm going to pull a few points from Lyndon Gill, who's offered a really beautiful set of questions. I don't know if we have time to look at all of the questions, so please have a look, and I've copied it for you and I'll send it. But I'm gonna dive into the last question he has, which is something that Nikoli and I wanted us to talk about. Lyndon says, I'm curious about your dealing up with spirit chapter. Would you say more about the kinds of spiritual landscapes and perhaps surprising religious overlaps in queer spiritual spaces you came across?
The kinds of spiritual landscapes. So creativity, like creating artwork, writing poetry, these are all spiritual landscapes. I talk more about the iconography in Hinduism and how Indo-Caribbean women, well, specifically Hindu women, use those icons, and then how women sort of created their own spiritual practices. So it wasn't seated in any specific religious narrative. So there were some women who looked to Christianity, others who bridged things from Buddhism and Hinduism and Christianity, so to sort of formulate their own understanding of themselves. Yeah, in a nutshell.
Yes. Thank you so much. And please, Lyndon asked some really important questions and has some reflections on decolonial mapping technologies, referencing other folks like Winter and Dion Brand. And also, I think you addressed some of his questions around what you're doing in terms of the mapping, how it is decolonial. But please dive in to Lyndon's question. And we just have, I would like us to wrap up in just a few minutes. So please, folks, if you can use the chat and share congratulations, anything you want to share to say to Krystal, we invite you to use the chat to do that, or the discussion. And really,
Lyndon briefly about the mapping.
Yes, please.
I didn't really go into too much detail about the history of mapping. Literally, it's like a paragraph. And then I talk more about mapping in other fields and so on, and how it has been taken up, how it has been used. It was just a lot, and not necessarily the right space to go into detail about the history of mapping. I didn't want that to take up more, like to look at the colonial history of mapping and to go into all the details of the maps and so on. That really wasn't what the project was about. And, you know, word limits, I just couldn't. So I had to make some choices about what conversation I really wanted to have. So I wasn't able to do much of that work.
Thank you. And I just want to invite us again in the last few moments. We do really want to wrap up as close to 8 as possible. And if we can all just, as I give my vote of thanks, please use the chat, share anything you'd like to say to Krystal as we're wrapping up. And I want to say just quick thanks and recognition of all who made tonight possible. So I just want to thank, of course, all of our speakers and presenters. Huge thanks to the IGDS staff across the Nita Barrow unit and the St. Augustine unit who made this happen. In particular, a special thanks to Catherine Chan, who designed all of the graphics for today and did a lot of the promotions across social media and was just really vital for our process. Huge thanks to Psyche Gonzalez, research assistant at St. Augustine, who has been here helping and assisting with the chat. Also Destiny Eastman, who organized on the Nita Barrow unit side with the Cave Hill campus technology folks who have created the Zoom for us and have been making sure that we are alive and working and able to do this. And finally, and most importantly, I want to thank Krystal for her work and for trusting us with your book launch, with celebrating this amazing work. And of course, everyone, I want you to join me, and a huge thanks to Nikoli. Nikoli and I just really enjoyed even just thinking about the questions to talk to you, and really it was a part of the process of just getting here and celebrating with you today. It's been so joyous. And thank you everyone who joined us this evening. Thank you everyone who joined the Zoom webinar. And we just want to say, have a beautiful and wonderful night, and go out and order this book. There are many ways you can do that across different booksellers, from the press themselves. Please do order this book, get it for your libraries. And for those of you who teach, get it for your classes. And we thank you so much for joining us tonight. And on behalf of all of the IGDS, we just want to say thank you. And Krystal, sincere congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody again. I echo all of the sentiments. Thank you. I'm honored.
We are honored, and we are so blessed to have you and this work and all that you do. And so we just want to say thanks again for joining us. Nikoli, if you have any music to just, do a little outro for us as we wrap up, we can stop the recording and say good night. And thank you all so much again for joining us. And yes, again, please use the chat and share. Oh, thank you, Psyche. Psyche has given us all the links. So if you need to find the book, it is there. Music.